Thank you for joining us today for the SmartBear Academy for LoadComplete. This is the LoadComplete 101. So before we get started and I introduce Amber, again, my name is Mary Catherine Sullivan and I'm an Enterprise Customer Success Manager here at SmartBear. And with us today, we have the wonderful Amber Fallon, who is one of our LoadComplete engineers. Just want to quickly go over and do a quick overview of SmartBear for everyone. So if some of you aren't sure, SmartBear, we are the provider of tools for development, testing, and operation teams to create great software faster than ever before. We have 6.5 million users. We are in 194 countries, so our customers are located all over the world. And we have roughly about 22,000 companies who are using SmartBear tools, which is absolutely incredible. We are headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, and we have 7 offices globally, including Galway, Ireland, Stockholm, Sweden, Austin, Texas, and Memphis as well. We were founded in 2009, and we are open source innovators. So if you're familiar with tools such as Swagger or SoapUI, that is how you possibly know SmartBear as well. And with that, just wanted to quickly go over some of the tools that we have here at SmartBear. Again, looking at the UI level, we have tools starting all the way at early development for code and document review with Collaborator, moving into more of that functional UI testing with Test Complete, into cross-browser testing, being able to run tests on real devices in the cloud, and of course, LoadComplete, which is what Amber will be going over to today. And then moving into some of the API level, we have tools such as Swagger Hub, which allows you to design, develop, and document your APIs. Again, SoapUI for creating API automated functional tests, Service V Pro, and LoadUI Pro, again, all fitting in with the API lifecycle for virtualizing and creating API load tests. So this is just a quick overview of some of the product portfolio for SmartBear. But again, today we're going to be highlighting on LoadComplete to create web load tests. So Amber, I'm going to give it over to you to share your screen.
Okay, excellent. So as MK mentioned, if there are any questions anywhere along the line, please feel free to type them into the box and we will address your questions as we go through. Today we are talking about load testing with LoadComplete. LoadComplete is what you can see on the screen in front of you. We're going to go through some of the basics. We're going to talk about what LoadComplete is and how it works. I'm going to give you some basic information about the tool itself. Then we're going to go through recording a scenario with LoadComplete. We're going to talk about some of the options that you have for customizing a scenario. And then we'll talk about actually building out and testing a load test. Now, I don't think this should take us the full hour, so we might end a little bit early and give you some of your day back. But if it does go the full hour, that's fine too. Again, any questions that you have, we'll have time at the end of the session to address those. So here is LoadComplete. LoadComplete is a Windows application. It works with Windows machines only, so do be aware of that. It is also a desktop application. It requires installation on a machine. We have floating and fixed licenses available, and those have slightly different application uses. We can talk about that if this is something that you're not aware of, or if you've got questions about that. You can reach out to us at SmartBear and we can have a discussion one-on-one about your licensing needs. So this is LoadComplete. That's what you can see. On the left-hand side here is the Project Explorer. This is a really handy pane. This has everything you need to run a load test. So it's got information about which machines you have available to you if you're sharing that load out across multiple computers. It's got information about which scenarios and which tests I have running. It's also got all of my logs. So down here is all the logs, and I can open these up and you'll see a report and detail information for each test I've ever run for the life of my license of this tool. So that can be great help in going back and reviewing things and looking further in detail into the things that I have done previously. We've got the main workspace window. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but I do want to highlight something in specific, and that's the interactive help menu that you see over here. The interactive help menu is a great resource. And it gets overlooked a lot, which is why I like to call attention to it specifically. It is an interactive interactive web tool. It's part of LoadComplete. It does connect to the internet. So if you're using LoadComplete in a closed environment with no internet access, it won't work for you. So just be aware of that. But if you are connected in an internet accessible environment, you'll see the interactive help menu pop up. And from here, it will give you insight and information, links to tutorials. It gives you videos. It gives you information on contacting our support team if necessary. And it allows you to go through in detail and see what the next steps are. So right now, because I haven't done anything, it tells me that the first thing I need to do is record a user scenario. If I click on Start Recording, it'll actually open that recording window up for me. This is a great way, if you're not very familiar with the tool, if you're doing your first couple of load tests, this is a great way to familiarize yourself with the steps and the way we typically do things. It's also a great resource for, hey, I'm not sure what I should do now. I've recorded a scenario, what comes next? Things like that. You can close it if you want. Get some screen real estate back. I'm going to leave it closed for the duration of the webinar today. But if you ever want to see it again, maybe you just want to familiarize yourself with something after a break, you can always click on Interactive Help right from the top of the main workspace pane. So those are the basics around LoadComplete. To get started, I'm going to go record a user scenario. So I'm going to take a couple moments and talk about what the recording screen looks like and some of the options here. From here, we'll actually go through and record that scenario. Then I'll show you some of the things that you can do to edit and configure that scenario to adapt it to the way you want to run your load test. We'll talk about adding these scenarios to load tests and then running load tests at the end of the demonstration. Now, just so everyone is on the same page, because in the performance or load testing space, there are a lot of different words that mean the same thing. It's all about terminology. So I want to be sure, since some of our competitors out there use the term scenario differently than we do, that everybody's familiar with what we mean when we say scenario. When we say scenario, we're talking about a single journey, a single transaction, a single script. It's a single set of steps that you want some of your virtual users to follow. You can have multiple scenarios within the same load test, so there's no limitation there as long as you have enough virtual users to support the loads you want to run. So it's sort of a component of a load test. Think of it like a building block. Now you can build something very simple like a cube with just one block, or you could build something complex and have multiple different blocks stacked together. That's what we mean when we say scenario. So from the basic screen, yours is going to look a little different if you haven't run a load test before. I have some options here. So when I click on advanced, you'll see I have the ability to append traffic to an existing scenario. That means if there are some additional steps that I want to record after I've finished something later on, I can come and I can add traffic to a scenario I've already recorded. That can be great for reducing time it takes to maintain your scripts. If something changes, if you have an additional logout step, if there's something that you want to add traffic to, you can do it just by click on this append traffic to the following scenario and then select your scenario from the drop-down list. Now, in addition to appending traffic to a scenario, I can also append traffic to a test. Now, what that means is if I record a scenario and I don't have this option selected, it'll actually create a brand new load test for me. I might want that. I might want to do a completely different load test. But in my case, since I've already got a test working, I just want to add a scenario into it. I'm going to choose to append the recorded, I'm going to choose to append the recorded scenario to this test. I'm also going to give my scenario a name. So I'm going to call this webinar. Now I can choose which browser I'd like to use. We have 4 options: Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, and Edge. You can use whichever browser you're comfortable with. They all work the same way, so they're all equally as good. What they do is that LoadComplete will establish a proxy connection between that browser and your instance of LoadComplete. It will then record all of the backend HTTP and HTTPS traffic that's created and allow you to use that traffic to build your load tests. What that means is that if you change something visually on the page, if you move a login button, if you change some of the resources on the page, the way they appear, you won't have to re-record your entire load tests. That's another way that LoadComplete helps you reduce the amount of time it takes to maintain your scripts. With some of the tools out there, if you were to change your login button from green to, let's say, blue, you might have to re-record the entire test. With LoadComplete, since it's working with the back-end traffic, you don't have to go through that process. As long as nothing has changed with the way that the website works behind the scenes, you can use the same load tests again and again and again. So I'm going to go with Google Chrome. I just happen to like Chrome. It's a personal preference. And I'm going to click record. And in just a second, LoadComplete is going to open up a new window of Chrome for me. Now it is important that I use that Chrome. I use this browser. I'm going to drag that over into my screen here so you can see it. Here you go. So you can see this window of Chrome. So now you can see up at the top, this is a private mode. So it's using the Chrome option for in private recording. That's a default based on the way that LoadComplete operates. Looks like we might be having a little bit more of a technical issue here. Let me try this one more time. Sometimes the screen share is a bit limited, so let's try this one more time.
Sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, we just couldn't see your screen, Amber, so I figured it might be important to...
Yeah, I appreciate you letting me know.
You're welcome. Yes.
Is that better?
Yep, now we can see it.
You can see everything. You can see that Chrome window there and the pagination.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so here is the Chrome window I was talking about. Again, I apologize for that. And here at the top is the recorder window. Now, the recorder window allows you to create custom pagination. This is an option. You do not have to do this. You can do this if you want. This allows you to enter custom page names and to split pages. You can do this while you're recording, or if it's a page that you know, if it has logical names, if it's not going to be a problem on the back end, after you've run your load test and you're trying to diagnose issues, if the names of the pages make sense and if it's broken up in a way that makes logical sense to you, you won't have to do this. But if you want to, there's options. There's a toolbar here. I can give it a page name, so I can say Smart Store, since that's where we're going to be recording off of. And I can go here to my Smart Store. Now I can browse around here and I can do anything that a normal customer would do. So we can take a look at, ooh, that looks like an interesting chair right there. How about some shoes? Shoes are nice. I like shoes. Anything a normal customer would do. I can come from here and I can add items to the cart. I can do, again, anything a normal customer would. We can go to make sure that the contact us menu works. We can take a look at product comparisons. We can take a look at the shopping basket, anything a normal customer would do. And remember, you can have multiple different scenarios within the scope of the same load test. So if I wanted to do one scenario where we log in, we check a previous order, and then we log out, then I could record another scenario, a completely separate scenario where I add something to the cart, check the cart, and then go through the buy process. You can have another one where you do looking for items. You can have one where you do contact us. You can have as many as you want as makes sense to you. And a lot of that is going to depend on what you're looking to load test and what type of data you want to see once that load test is finished. Once you're done recording, you want to click on stop here. LoadComplete will then go through, it'll calculate your think time, and in addition, it's going to do something that's pretty unique to the way LoadComplete operates, and I like to highlight, and that's the correlate request and response parameters window. Now, what this means is that if there are dependencies, this particular browser doesn't have a lot, or this particular website doesn't have a lot in the way of dependencies because it's just a front end. There's not really anything behind it. It just looks pretty and allows me to show you things. But in the real world, when you're working with a login process, when you're working with a buy process, you're going to see things like tokens, CSRF tokens, session IDs, things of that nature. Things that you're going to want to pass from request to response to request to response throughout your test. Now, a lot of the tools out there will make you do this from scratch. You'll have to draw those dotted lines. You'll have to pass a value from request to response again and again and again, at least the first time you create the test. LoadComplete does not force you to do that. With LoadComplete, it will automatically correlate request and response parameters like that. So if you see them here, they're already correlated for you. If for some reason you want to correlate them yourself manually, there'll be checkboxes next to everything here, and you can just uncheck them. And then once you're ready to go, you can just click on Finish. And that's all there is to recording. MK, did we have any questions come in around recording?
We had one question come in. Someone wants to know, does LoadComplete support file uploads? I'm not sure if that's to do with the recording, but I think it's just might be a general question.
So as a general rule, it's working off of HTTP and HTTPS requests. It can support some file uploads, but there's some conditional limitations around that. So I would invite you to reach out to us directly and we can schedule a call one-on-one. That way we'll be able to review your particular situation, give you more of a specific answer rather than something generalized. So back into my scenarios. I've got one I've already created. It's a little bit more robust than what I just did here. This one was pretty simple, just to show you how recording works. But I'm going to come in and let's take a look at my buy process for a t-shirt here. Now you can see here I've got multiple pages. We start at a demo site, we check out the merchandise page, I pick out a shirt, add it to the cart, and then we go through the checkout process. So those are the steps involved here. Now in my Scenario Explorer, which you see at the top of the page, there are some things that I can do. Now, one of the first things we recommend doing is you want to verify your scenario. So there's this verification link over here. You can click on that, and it will simulate that scenario with one virtual user. I'm actually going to skip that for the purposes of this webinar because I want to show you so many other things to do within the tool. But here's what thing you want to do. It'll run through that scenario beginning to end with one virtual user and let you know if there are any problems. That's a great place to go if you need to refine and fix your test in any way. So for the buy process for the shirt, you can see expected codes over here. If there's anything here that doesn't fit, like if you've got any redirects or something out of the standard 200 OK, here you can go in and you can say treat a 301, for instance, as OK. So if I know that 301 is an acceptable value, I'm just going to mark that as OK, and then it's not going to cause my test to fail. I've also got think time values up here, and you'll see these change with each step. So right here, for example, the merchandise page, I spent a little while browsing around and taking a look at what we have on that merchandise page. And as a result there, the think time is 6,505 milliseconds. So maybe that was a little longer than I really should have been browsing. So I can actually reduce this. I could delete that 6 and leave it with 505 milliseconds. I can decide what's the acceptable think time. And there are ways you can programmatically adjust think time. This is really handy for things like, honestly, what I was doing here is I was referring to a sheet of steps that I wanted to include in this, and I dropped the paper on the floor. Then I had to go and pick it up, and that took a couple of seconds, which is why my think time value is so high here. That's a great way for me to illustrate if something like that happens in your recording, you could just come here and fix it. It's not a big deal because you can change those values. So here, because I know I increased that, I'm going to bring it down to 3505 because that's more realistic. That's 3.5 seconds as opposed to almost 7 seconds. So in each step here, in each page, I can split these out and we can see the individual resources here. Also on the page view, I can see a full timeline. So here you can see each individual step. There's connections and it gives me the time frame for each one. So I can look at these and we can see, for example, there's a search button. That's one of my requests here. We can see that search button. There it is. You can see requests and responses here. There's summaries. You've also got an option here for expected codes. So you can do that same thing we were talking about, but you can do it on a step level. Down here on the bottom, the response body, we've got data selectors. So if you want to bring data out of this request, this is a visual request. This is an image in this response here, so that's not a great one to choose. But if you have something else, like I could pull something else from here, you'd have something here. You can right click on it and you can create a data selector. You can pull data right out of there and then reuse it later. We've also got validators. So if you want to be sure that something comes back the way that you expect, you can come in here and click on right click, new item, and then you can add a variable or a value, and you can say, is it equal to, contains, does not equal, or does not contain another variable or value. This is a great way to be sure that what comes back in your request is what you expect. It's not enough to generate that 200 OK response message. You can see that up here in response. We got that HTTP 200 OK. But here you also want to go the extra step of making sure that something that comes back in this response is what I expect it to be. So those are sort of the more upper screen options here. These are things that I can do right from within the LoadComplete window. And if I wanted to change something with that correlation, I can pull up that wizard again. It's over here in the corner. There's that correlate request and response. This one, since it's got a little bit more behind it, I can show you a little bit more what that looks like. So see, you can see that session ID. There's also a CSRF token, and those all have correlate next to them, because I could use that data and I can correlate that for the duration of this scenario. Now, down in the bottom, we have two things I want to talk about. In this separate window, it's separate from the Scenario Explorer, but it's below it. We have the Operations repository. So the Operations repository has a lot of different operations that I can use to change the way my scenario works. Each one of these is drag and drop. There's absolutely no scripting required with LoadComplete, so you don't have to learn and maintain complex scripts. It's all drag and drop, which means it's quick and easy to record and quick and easy to modify. Any of these options I can see down here, I want to select and then drag up to where I'd like it. LoadComplete does operate sequentially top to bottom. So if you want to, for example, set a delay, down here, there's a delay. I can select it and drag it to where I'd like it. Let's say I want it after page 5, but before page 6. And let's say I want to delay it by 7 seconds. I happen to know that that checkout process can be a little slow, and I want to give it time. So I can create that delay. Delete that if I decide later that my process has been smoothed out a little bit. Maybe I don't need that delay anymore. I can just delete it. We've also got groups, so you can group pages together. You can create page splits with page. You can create if-then statements with if. There's also while statements, which are sort of like if-then, but a little different. There's rendezvous points, variable values. You can also select transaction or end of transaction and call a separate scenario right from within the LoadComplete window and right from your Scenario Explorer. Now, in addition to the operations repository, we've also got the host list. Now, the host list, unfortunately, gets overlooked fairly often. So I really like to talk about it when I have a chance. When I'm talking to customers or prospects, I like to point out the host list in specific because it's useful for two reasons. The first reason is weeding out traffic that you might not actually want to execute the calls of. This is a great example in my particular transaction. This is a buy process. Now, I want to go through all the way, but I don't actually want to use PayPal. I don't want to charge any money. I don't want to deal with moving money around. I just want to check my page. So I can come down here, lost my mouse, come down here to the host list. And you can see here's the hosts for everything we encountered. There's images. You might see Google Analytics or another analytic tool down here. You might see third-party providers or CDNs. If there's something you don't want to execute, you can just uncheck it. So I selected to uncheck PayPal, and now we're actually not going to go through the PayPal portion. And that's a quick and easy way to do that. Another benefit of the host list is this is how LoadComplete handles environments. If you want to run a load test, let's say in your dev environment, you record the test and it's going to have the URL string of your dev environment. Now, if you want to run a test in your UAT or your user acceptance testing environment or even in production, rather than having to record from scratch, which you could do, recording is quick and easy, so you could do that if you wanted to keep those tests separate. But if you didn't want to do that, for ease of use, you can actually come here and change the host. So you see where it says PayPal and PayPal? If I wanted to, I can click on this blue icon here and then set a variable. I can provide a new variable for that host. So right there, that has a list of my hosts in it. So it might have dev.smartbear or dev.paypal or uat.paypal as the host. And then I can change that host so that I can run my load test in multiple different environments without re-recording my scenarios. So that is the scenario options. We've talked about recording, we've talked about load complete in general, and we talked about ways that we can refine those scenarios once they are recorded, things that we can do to change the way they operate. Are there any questions around that?
So we did have a question come through. This person would like to know, is there any way to hide cookie sessions that possibly show the hard-coded value? For example, if I log in with any user, then select the request and go to the cookie session and check that load complete shows the hard-coded value, how do I hide those values or stop cookies from being added to such values?
Unfortunately, we don't have a way to like mask or cover them. I know that request has been made. If you wanted to go onto the forum at community.smartbear.com, you can submit that, and our development team, our product team, will review those periodically and decide what they're going to do to enhance the product in the future. At this time, you could variabilize or make that a variable value. It's still going, if you see request and response data, it's always going to have the value that was previously passed. It's historical data and you can't change it, but you can make it a variable parameter in a scenario so that it doesn't have a value going forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber. They said they would put that question or that request on the forum today.
Perfect.
Very cool.
Okay, so moving right along, now that I've recorded my scenario, it works the way I expect. It does what I want it to do. No, we're not going to save that. Now I'm ready to add it into a test. Down here at the bottom, I have my demo test. Oops, sorry, I skipped ahead of myself. Before we get there, let's talk about variables. Sorry about that. So variables. Variables are ways for me to add data to my load tests. So maybe I want to do different products each time. Maybe I don't always want to buy the same shirt. Maybe I want to sign in with different usernames and passwords. Or maybe I want to request quotes. Maybe it's like an insurance website and I want to provide different information to get different quotes. The way I'll do that with variables. So we have two options for variables. We have the data generator, which means load complete will create data for you. That's really useful if you don't need specific data. So if you don't need logins that work on your page already, if you want, again, somebody signing up for a quote, you can just give them random names, random phone numbers, random email addresses. The data generator can be great because it takes a lot of the pressure off of you so that you don't have to create those values. So let's take a look at the data generator. Come into the variable screen, click on data generator, and then create a name for your variable. So I'm going to call this one quote email. And then, oops, I'm sorry, I can't have spaces. I always forget that. It's just so automatic to type the space bar. But I can't have spaces in the name of this, so I'm going to call it quote email, all one word. Then I want to generate a value. So I want to use an email address. Now we can generate a variety of different values for you. You could do names, emails, social security numbers, street addresses, zip codes, integers, values from a set. There's lots of different options here for you. So I'm going to use email. I'm going to click OK there. Now I've got email right there, and I can add that into anywhere that I have a variable field. So now that I've created that user or that email field, I'm all set. And now I just have to determine how I want to pull that. Click finish, and now I have that quote email. So I could go into my scenario which asks for that quote, and I can provide that email for that quote right into that request, and it'll be passed in, and I'll get the information back that way. Now, if you need something specific, usernames and passwords, for instance, those are usually tied to specific values. You'd have to provide those, and then you can do that in a variety of ways. Instead, you want to click on New Variable and give it a variable, or I'll say character, and then choose how you have that data. We can do database, CSV, Excel spreadsheets, anything you've got in those formats you can bring into LoadComplete, and it's going to work off of columns. I'm going to choose a CSV file. I happen to have one handy on my desktop here, so I can browse to it. Right on my desktop, I've got a list of variables. Select that. I have my delimiter, in this case is a semicolon. Next to that, I choose the column I want my data from, in this case F1. There we go. And that's all I have to do. I can then choose how I want that data to be pulled. This is the access type. Now, each one of these access types has a sentence about what it means. Generally, I will tell you that the most common is next value on each by a virtual user. It means that each virtual user gets that variable, and then it returns the next value. It returns the next value whenever the variable is accessed. You can also randomize. You can choose each next use on a workstation. Next value on each use, that's also the second most common, I would say. But this depends on how you want your load test to work and how your application handles data. Once you're done, you then have variables that you can use in your requests, in your scenarios. So there, we talked about variables. Let's move on and talk about tests. Here's my demo test. We've got this one right here. This is my good standby. I've been using this test for a while. So I've got a lot of history associated with it. And you can see that history again if you look over here in the logs where I've used that demo test. You can see I've got that one. That's from all the way back in October. I've updated and changed the test since then, but I'm still using the same demo test. And whether or not you want to use the same test or a different test is going to depend a lot on how you want to view your data and how you want to save that data and view it in the future. So my test itself is broken into two separate sections. In my workspace, I've got my top of screen and my bottom of screen options. My top of screen options that you can see right here are controlled by virtual user groups. My bottom of screen options that we're going to get to next down here control everything about the test. So in the top of the screen, each virtual user group is going to act independently and I can control what they do. Down at the bottom, this is going to cover the entire load test as a whole. So here, I've got a couple of extra virtual user groups here. Let me delete some of them because I don't need all these guys. There's a lot here. I was running something more complex earlier this morning, so I can delete those. And generally, I like to work with as few as I need to get what I'm testing done. So if I'm doing 3 different things, 3 is generally a good rule. But you can have as many as you want. And the only restriction on that is down here. See the user count column? There's a total in the divider right between the top of screen and bottom of screen. It tells me I've got 3 virtual user groups, and the total of my virtual users across all 3 is 21. Now, the number of virtual users you can use is based on the license that you purchased. For example, this license of LoadComplete that you're looking at right now, I'd have the smallest version, that's 250 virtual users. That means that this number has to be 250 or less. Other than that, I can have as many virtual users as I'd like, split across as many virtual user groups as makes sense to me. And I can call them anything I'd like. This first one is called Home Station. Let's call this one Boston, and let's call this one Tokyo. Now you can name them based on anything you want. I just picked 2 at random. You want to generally name them something that'll make sense to you. Choose how many virtual users are in this group. In this case, instead of 1, I'm going to go to 10. So now I have a total of 30. And now we get into the variables. There's a list of variables and each virtual user group behaves independently. So for example, I have my scenarios. Now remember I mentioned you could test with multiple different scenarios. My first one, for example, we use that Smart Store. We'll use that webinar for the first one actually. Smart Store is the second one. And let's use Amber. No, we'll use the buy process for the third one. No, wait. That's down right now, so I'll use Smart Store. So I've got 2 different scenarios in 3 different virtual groups. And then I can choose Workstation. Now, Workstation is sort of a separate area. What Workstation is this is how LoadComplete handles distribution. So how do you split that test across multiple machines? Now, there are 2 key reasons why you might want to distribute your load. Number 1, the limit of this machine is 2,000 virtual users. That's the maximum that any single instance of LoadComplete can handle. If you want to do more than 2,000, if you want to do 20,000, you need to share that load out across multiple different machines. The other reason is geographic perspective. Let's say I want to test not only inside my data center, not inside my headquarters. Right now I'm at SmartBear headquarters in Boston, Mass. But if I test within the headquarters, I'm going to get maybe a synthetically lowered response time. My performance here is going to be a lot different than my performance is going to be further away or out away from my servers. Because of that, I might want to test from another data center. As MK mentioned earlier on in the webinar, we have offices all over the world. Maybe I'll reach out to a colleague in Galway and see if I can use one of their machines out there to run my test. And I can do that simultaneously. So instead of Boston and Tokyo, I can have Boston and Galway. Oops. Galway, Ireland. And there we go. Now, we have two options for distributing. You can use what we call an agent. There is no additional fee for the agent software. You can get it from the downloads page of your My SmartBear account. Once you've purchased LoadComplete, you'll see that option there for agent. And then you can install that agent wherever you'd like. Machines in your network, outside of your network, in the cloud, completely up to you. You come over to this stations option, and there it is. This is where I can go to add new. Here, I've got a couple that are already here. If they're on your network, when you click new item, it'll scan and it'll pop up for you once you've got that agent software installed. If they're not in your network, you'll need to provide host name and IP address, and then we'll be able to gather that information and connect to that. And then you'll see those appear in the workstations dropdown. You'll see these options for wherever those agents are installed. So let's say, for example, Galway is probably my local host 3. I can choose that. Now, the other option here is using an integration with Amazon Web Services. If you use Amazon Web Services, Amazon EC2, you can come here to the cloud section and then right-click and add an Amazon image item. And that's going to ask for your Amazon username and password. You can put that in as secret access key and access key. Provide that information right here, and then you'll be able to connect to Amazon. Now, there's a couple of really great benefits that come along with this integration. First, you'll be able to stand up, image the machine, run the test, and then tear the Amazon image down without having to do anything manual. LoadComplete takes care of it all, which could be really great. It means a lot less work on your side for standing up and imaging the machines, as well as remembering to tear them down later, so you don't accidentally forget and then might leave them running over the holiday or over a weekend, which could be pretty expensive. Now, the other benefit is we have this estimate test price option. What that does is it goes out to, if you have selected one cloud machines there, so let me select that one right there, and then you click on estimate test price. There is a Amazon call that actually goes out. I don't have my Amazon username and password in right now, but this would go out and it would tell me for hour blocks of time with the options that I've chosen about how much Amazon would charge me on their side to use their servers to run the test. It can be great knowing that information in advance, because then you can plan better and you can make sure that you don't use all of your department's budget for load testing on running one single test. Now, in addition to the workstations, which is distribution, we've also got browsers. LoadComplete can emulate a variety of different browsers. So you can use recorded. You can also choose, we've got Edge, we've got Chrome, we've got Safari, we've got some mobile browsers as well. There's iPhone Safari and iPad Safari. There's some Galaxy WebKits here as well. Lots of different options for Firefox. Choose whichever ones you want, and then you can choose to emulate connection speeds. So we can go all the way from 56K to the maximum allowable by the network. And those are the top screen options. Now, let's get into the bottom of screen options. We'll check in and see if there are any additional questions. Then we'll talk about test execution, and we'll round out our webinar by talking about reporting and what types of information you'll get from LoadComplete. So down at the bottom here, the first thing I've got is load profile. This is steady load. That's the first option. That's going to mean that all 10 of these virtual users in my home station, all 10 in Boston, and all 10 in Galway will fire off at once. I've also got the option here for stepwise. I can start with a low number and scale to a high number. These numbers are variable, and they will max out at your user count field here. You've also got custom shape. Now, I really like custom shape because that means I can do spike testing. So I can draw spikes. It also means that I can start with my maximum virtual users and then drop down. and then spike back up. I can do peaks and valleys. It's completely up to me. All I have to do is draw the line the way I want it, click OK, and you can see the number of virtual users on the left-hand side there. Next, we've got continuous load. I like to talk about this one because this confuses a lot of people. I think the way it's named is kind of confusing, so I like to talk about it. Continuous load means if it's enabled that all of these virtual users are going to restart once they finished. So I've got 10 virtual users in here. Each one of them, if I choose steady load, for example, all of those 10 are going to fire off. And then once they finish, they're going to start again. And they're going to go again and again and again for the duration of my test. Now, if I disable continuous load, if I uncheck it here, it means that each one of those virtual users is going to run my scenario once, and then they're going to stop. So here I choose my test duration. This one is only set to go for 1 minute, but I can choose however many hours, minutes, and seconds I want that test to run for. We've got think time. So remember we talked about earlier in the scenario editor, we talked about using think time at the individual request level. If you wanted to randomize your think time rather than going in and assigning think times at the individual level, which could take a long time, instead you can do it programmatically, and you can expand or narrow these windows as you'd like. So you can randomize that think time there. We've also got quality of service. So you can set what are acceptable thresholds for you for maximum page load time and maximum time to first byte. And then those will generate errors if they're exceeded. Now you can adjust these based on your website's limitations, or you can uncheck them entirely and then they won't generate errors. Now last but not least on our configuration screen for the test is stop test on error. You could run, let's say, for example, a soak test, which should run for 24 hours or more, and just see the results at the end. Or you can say, well, you know, if we hit 100 errors in a 24-hour period, I don't care if it's hour 1, I'm going to consider that too many. Let's just stop the test right there. You can also edit this and make it configurable so you can decide how many errors is an acceptable threshold for you. So those are the options for configuring a load test. MK, do we have any questions over there?
We do. We have a couple questions that have come in over the past probably like 10 minutes. So we may backtrack just for a few minutes.
That's fine.
But someone was wondering, under the scenario explore, do you mind going over the page and the icons and what they signify?
I don't think that's unfortunately the best use of the time right now. We've only got about 10 minutes left and we still have reporting to get through. I would highly recommend checking out the documentation. If you go to smartbear.com, select LoadComplete, then select resources. There's a documentation link that explains things in great detail. And that's a great way to go through and learn more information about LoadComplete as well.
Perfect. And also provide that link in the question box as well. Then there was another question that came through. Someone was wondering, and I'm not sure because of the time, but they wanted to know if you could show how to create load tests using test complete tools, and then whether or not does LoadComplete support the cross-browser testing.
So LoadComplete doesn't have any interaction with cross-browser testing. Test Complete is a completely separate tool to LoadComplete. So if you're using Test Complete and you want information on that, I highly recommend signing up for one of the Test Complete SmartBear Academy sessions, and they'll walk through Test Complete for you. If you have website testing in your Test Complete tests, there's an option in Test Complete itself that you can reuse those for LoadComplete tests. There's just a button at the top right-hand corner of the test interface in Test Complete. It looks just like this one up here, this LoadComplete option, but it's got a little piece of like paper over it. And you can click that. And as long as you've got a licensed copy of LoadComplete, all of those requests will be brought into LoadComplete. That's how that integration works. But we're talking about LoadComplete. So again, sign up for Test Complete if you want to learn about creating tests using Test Complete.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber. That's all the questions so far.
Perfect. So now we want to talk about the ways to run tests. So once you've created your test, you've customized it, you've built it out the way that you'd like, now you'll want to obviously run that test. So we have two options. First, you can press play here and that'll run that test. I'm actually going to do that for you in just a moment. The next thing is you can use a command line prompt. So that's for automation. That allows LoadComplete to be very versatile in the way that you're using it for execution. So if you have, let's say, a continuous integration tool, TeamCity, TFS, Jenkins, Bamboo, anything that accepts command line prompt, you can get the command line for your test right from within LoadComplete, and then you can use that command line to execute the test within that tool. Now, the one caveat there is that whatever machine is going to run that test needs access to a license of LoadComplete. So you might need to either put a license of LoadComplete onto your CI server or use a floating license that CI server will have access to if you want to use something like TeamCity, TFS, Jenkins, etc., to execute that test for you. Now, the other way, if you're not using a continuous integration tool, or you just want to schedule this test to run during off-peak hours or during planned maintenance or something of that nature, you can create that command line prompt, and then you can use it to build a batch file, and then you can use the system scheduler in Windows to kick off that test wherever you'd like. And the master machine, whichever machine you've used to build the test and whichever one is being used to execute, that one's going to have your logs and everything once you're finished. Now, the question does come up fairly often that does LoadComplete have the ability to email reports once the test is finished? Unfortunately, it does not. What you can do is there are processes that you can write in Windows that allow you to do that. There are also some third-party applications that can do things like that for you. Some of the continuous integration tools can do things like that too. So, moving right along, let's execute this test. Manually, I just want to press the play button. I've got one up here as well, and it'll prepare for simulation. It'll take a couple of minutes just to make sure everything will work. It usually doesn't take that full 30 minutes it tells you it's going to take, but it can. So here is my runtime view. I have a number of panes that I can choose. I can go, for example, from maybe 1, I could do 2 or 4. Personally, I like 2. I think 1 is a little too simple, 4 is a little too cluttered, but that's completely up to me. This display shows on the main screen, and then you can choose which one you like. We have custom, there's basic quality, there's load time, transfer speed, some server-side metrics there as well. If you use custom, you can check or uncheck what it is you want to see. So here you can see we're running a test. That test was set to run for a minute, so I'm just going to let it finish there. And then we'll use that to segue into talking about reporting and what types of reports that you can expect from LoadComplete. So here's my runtime screen. I can see this data live. It's happening right now. We've also got the load testing progress bar up here at the top. That's almost finished. I've got one little green square left. As soon as that's filled out, my load test will stop, and it'll compile all those reports for me. There you go. And here's my reports. So it tells me we had 14 warnings. That's totally fine. I expected some warnings. So what we'll do is we'll go through and I'll show you what those look like. So you can see some basic information. This is the reporting window. So you can see there's my load testing report. It tells me the project and the test. You can see start time, stop time. There's a lot of information here, page times. You can see the standard deviation here. Now this is for a single test. You can also use the compare results here, and you can compare any 2 together. That can be really useful if you want to do baselining. So you want to run your test once with 1 virtual user, and then with load, 100 users, 1,000 virtual users, and see where the differences are. It's also great to do year over year, quarter over quarter, or before and after maintenance cycles. If you've changed something with your test, you can use the comparison report, which is, again, right here at the top, to see if there's any differences. So in the first tab, my summary there, I can see basic things of what happened. I can look at my load profile graph here. I can expand that out. We can look at the host list. We can also see pass and fail data, or I can click on view and it'll bring me over there. It'll bring me in and I can see what happened. So you see everything green looks good. Looks like the one that failed here was everybody on station, my home station. And I can click on these and I can see further detail about what exactly failed and when. Now the easiest way to do that is to just uncheck the green. Then I'm only going to see the yellow. So it looks like I got a 403 under where it says release notes in my smart store. I got a 403. We expected a 200. That's why it failed. And if you come in here and look at this, you'll see request and response data. So there's my request. There's my response. It was a 403 forbidden right there. Didn't like my in this case, it didn't look at my cookie value. So I can go in and I can see what the issue is. I can get more details. And there's also the help link for resolving errors and warnings. I could also export this if I wanted to view it later or share it with the team. Now back in the, oops, wrong one. Let's go down and look at that report again. In that report, in addition to the summary and the basic data you can see here, we've also got pass and fail. So you can see this separated out. There's a nice pie chart. It says 60% of the time, or 65% rather, we were acceptable. 35%, there were some warnings. And if you would see errors, they'd be here in red, and they'd be another portion of the pie there. You'd see them total or by scenario. So for my Smart Store, for example, I worked 100% of the time. My webinar only worked 70% of the time. So it looks like I need to do some further refining of that. I've got my transactions. I can look at pages and resources, quality of service errors. We talked about those when we talked about configuring the test. If you have those configured, they'd be here. You can look at response time, break that down and look at the response time information here that we've got. You can see where we spiked here, where we had dips and valleys. You can also look at this in regards to page load time or time to first and last byte. Now the infrastructure section is really interesting. Here you can see request transfer speeds just right out of the box. You don't have to do anything at all and you can see that. And the interesting thing I think is you can correspond the request transfer speed to the number of virtual users. Looks like we're fine initially. Then we sort of hit this dip around the 40-second mark. And then we start to spike up again right around the 50-second mark. And the number of users and the request transfer speed seem to be right in line. So that's kind of interesting to me. Now, in addition to this, right out of the box, I also have the option of configuring a server monitor. So what I can do is I can get server information. So basically performance monitor or perfmon data from my application server. Now I don't have to install anything on the application server itself, which is one of the other really great benefits of LoadComplete. Installing something on your application server is a little scary. You don't want to risk that. So instead, we use a permissions-based model. What that means is that you basically provide username and password, and they do have to be admin credentials to that server, and then we'll just gather the perfmon data. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my website isn't really a website. There's really no server behind it. It's just a front end that I use for demonstrations. So there's no server for me to connect to. But in the real world, you're going to have an application server, and you can absolutely do that. And then you'll have the ability to gather that data and stack it right up in this report. And that can provide a lot of insight, especially if the type of load testing you're doing is stress testing. If your test is more geared to see what happens on the server side when there's a lot of traffic on the front end, server monitoring is a great option for you. So next, we've got the top 10. This breaks down to slow pages, slow responses, slow transactions. So I can see what my slowest pages were. Looks like right there it's request 128. Again, that doesn't tell me a whole lot, but if I give my pages custom names when I record, it might tell me a little bit more. It tells me right there 128 was the slowest. I can see if I look at it in detail, it's 2912.jpg. Looks like time to first byte was 248 milliseconds. Time to last byte was 1.48 seconds. And the page load time was 36.95 seconds total. And I can see this broken down there. And then last but not least, we've got custom charts. You can use this to create a custom option if there's something you want to see in a different way, or if you want it arrayed differently. You can come into the custom chart section, create as many charts as you'd like using the new chart. Then you can scroll through it. You can choose the data table options. And you can choose what you'd like included in the test, or in the report rather. And then once you've finished, you can export this to HTML or to PDF. And then it's also stored over here on the left-hand side under the log section. Thank you all so much for your time today. Again, please get in touch. We're very happy to answer questions, to help you get up and running. We have a lot of really great resources for you as well. So thank you for your time. And